So today we are going to talk about the nervous system. The main purpose of the nervous system is for communication. That means to control your heartbeat, to control your breathing rate, to control everything and communicate everything, to control everything that happens in your body. Your nervous system is broken up into two parts. The first part is your central nervous system. The second part is your peripheral nervous system. We'll get to the peripheral nervous system again here in a second. Let's start with the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of your brain and spinal cord. If it's a neuron in your brain or your spinal cord, it is the central nervous system. For the most part, the central nervous system is where the decisions are made and the information is stored. Any neuron that lives outside of the brain or the spinal cord is a part of the peripheral nervous system. So this would be outside of the brain and spinal cord. There's two different ways that you can be outside. And really, it's two different directions. If you're sensing things from the outside world, hey, my hand is hot, or wow, that fire is hot, or wow, that pin hurt when I put my finger on it. When you're sensing things, like when you're hearing my voice and seeing this particular video, those are all sensing, and so your sensory pathways deliver that information to the central nervous system. So that's the direction. Sensory pathways carry messages to the central nervous system. Motor pathways carry messages from the central nervous system. And of course, things aren't always that simple, so we have to break things down. Motor pathways get broken down even further. We have somatic portion of your motor pathway of the peripheral nervous system and the autonomic portion of the motor pathway of the peripheral nervous system. Now, somatic is voluntary. Raise your hand, flip a coin, throw a baseball, do a pirouette. Those are all things that you consciously and voluntarily control. So somatic is what you think about, you control voluntarily. The other part of those motor pathways is your autonomic or involuntary portion for your motor pathways. These are the things that control things you don't think about. Like, again, going back to the somatic side, I can say, please raise your hand, and you do it. Okay? Now, go think about this for the autonomic. Have your heart beat 15 times in 1 second and then 2 times in the next second. You can't control your heart beating consciously or voluntarily. Okay? It's autonomic. It's involuntary. So that's part of the motor pathway. Motor pathways get broken down in the somatic, the voluntary, or the autonomic, the involuntary, the things that you don't think about. And then, of course, last you see on this graphic, you see that autonomic gets broken down further into the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Again, they're still both involuntary. The sympathetic deals with arousal, or what we'll call fight or flight. It's what your body's natural knee-jerk reaction is to a particular situation. You're hiking through the woods and you see a bear come across. Do you faint, or do you stick up and try and fight in that particular situation? Whatever you're going to do is going to happen in the sympathetic division, fight or flight. Think of adrenaline as that sympathetic portion of your autonomic motor pathway. And then parasympathetic is the rest and digest. So here with sympathetic, adrenaline situation, huge, high, crazy energy, and parasympathetic brings you back down to earth. So they work in harmony with one another for checks and balances to make sure that your body's always working correctly. The nervous system is made up of neurons, and there's 3 different types of neurons. The first type is sensory neurons. Sensory neurons carry information to the central nervous system. Just like we talked about, the sensory pathway brings messages to the central nervous system. That's what the sensory neurons do. I'm going to skip down here to motor neurons. Just like the motor pathway brings messages from the central nervous system, motor neurons carry information from the central nervous system as well. So the other thing that we have up here is this interneuron. The interneuron is called the associative. So here we have sensory neurons bringing messages to this interneuron, and this interneuron doing something and sending a message through the motor neurons. Well, what this associative property of this interneuron does is it decides what to do. I call it the decision maker. So if you think about it like this, you put your hand over a fire. Well, your senses are going to say, wow, fire hot, ow, fire hot, ow. So your sensory neurons are going to communicate that message, fire hot, ow, fire hot, ow, fire hot, ow, fire hot, ow, until it gets to your associative neurons, okay, or your inner neurons. Your inner neuron is what makes the decision, right? It decides. So your inner neuron decides to send a message to those muscles to move your hand, 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 move your hand. So the motor neurons carry that message of move your hand until the muscles move your hand away from the fire. So sensory neurons to the central nervous system, inner neurons make the decision, and motor neurons carry messages from the central nervous system. So here we have the human brain. Most people think it's just this squiggly stuff in here. But the human brain is not just the squiggly stuff, and we'll get into that in a moment. But as you see in here, it's also all of this stuff, portions of the midbrain and the brain stem as well. There's a lot more to the brain than just the squiggly stuff. The midbrain, hugely important for integrating all of the sensory information that we get from our different bodies. So a lot of times when we eat, we can see it, we can taste it, and we can smell it, all giving us this image of our favorite food. Same thing happens. The midbrain integrates what we see, what we smell, and what we hear and what we taste all together at the same time to store that memory in various portions of other parts of the brain. It regulates our visual reflexes, regulates what we hear, and those types of reflexes as well. So that's the midbrain. Our cerebrum, that is the squiggly stuff. It is the most highly evolved structure of a mammalian brain. Yes, we're mammals, so that would be for us as well. So the squiggly stuff is not just the brain. That's not the only part of the brain. But the squiggly stuff is a part of our brain. Our cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres. So if we drew a line down the middle, okay, and again, we're looking at the back of the brain right here. So this is our left hemisphere of our cerebrum. This is our right hemisphere of our cerebrum. Ironically, the left hemisphere controls the right side of our body. The right hemisphere controls the left side of our body. Kind of cool. So if you're right-handed, that means your left hemisphere is what's controlling you right. If you're left-handed, and can probably draw really well, but we'll get into that in a moment. If you're left-handed, your right hemisphere is dealing with that. And then last but not least, in here, we see these little guys. Okay, I'll erase it all here in a second, but I want you to pay attention to these little guys right here. Okay, that is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres. It connects information between the two hemispheres so the two hemispheres can coordinate more quickly than they could without the corpus callosum. On a small sidetrack, the corpus callosum is what's responsible for causing seizures. Seizures are caused by a hyperactive corpus callosum. basically these guys are short-circuiting in here. So, and this only happens to incredibly high difficulty functioning grand mal seizures, if you have lots of grand mal seizures. But what sometimes they'll do is they'll go in and they'll cut and they'll sever the corpus callosum. People still function normally. It's just the quick activating and connecting of the two hemispheres is not as much, but they cut the corpus callosum, so now that individual doesn't have any seizures anymore. So our cerebrum is divided into two different halves or hemispheres. The left hemisphere deals with language, math, and logic, among other things, but those are the things that I think are the most important. The right hemisphere deals with pattern recognition, spatial relationships, those are fancy terms for art, other things, and music. So the right side deals with music and art. The left hemisphere deals with language, math, and logic, among other things. So here's a question for you that I alluded to before. Let's say that you are the world's greatest piano player. Chances are, just taking a guess based on our information, or you're the next Picasso. Do you think you should be right-handed or left-handed if you're just taking a guess? The next Picasso, the next greatest pianist, the next greatest whatever musician. Right-handed or left-handed? Well, music and art are dealt with in the right hemisphere. Remember, the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. So, if you said the person that's really good in music and or art should be left-handed because the right hemisphere deals with the left side of the body, then you would be correct. Now, what about if you were an 8-year-old code breaker for the CIA dealing with high complex math problems? Well, math is dealt with over here in the left hemisphere, and remember, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body. So, the person was probably be right-handed. Okay, so cerebrum specialization. Different parts of the cerebrum does different things. We break everything up into 4 lobes. So this first lobe right here in blue, that's the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is for high complex order thinking. The fact that you know that the frontal lobe is up front is not necessarily vital information for you to live. If you forgot that at the end of this, which some of you might, you don't need to know it forever and ever and ever. You'll still live. However, the ability to store this information, this higher order thinking, this math and logic and brain function and nervous system stuff, all of that is stored here in the frontal lobe. Our next area would be right here. This is the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe does a lot of different things, but for us, let's make sure that we know speech and taste. The next one is down here in the temporal lobe. And again, a lot of other things go with it, but we're going to say hearing and smell are the 2 biggest ones that take place or are stored and processed in the temporal lobe. And then probably the easiest one, but the most ironic one as well, is this guy right here, the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe deals with vision. Well, this is the back of your brain. Your eyes are all the way up. Well, actually, they're more down here. They're down here, but they're at the front of your head. And your occipital lobe is in the back. So when you're seeing something like this slide right now, that has to travel through tons of neurons all the way back to get processed in your occipital lobe. Specialization of the cerebrum. Different lobes do different things to process different types of information. Our limbic system is incredibly important. It's so very cool. Your brain basically develops like an onion. And as it develops from the inside out. The most important things are on the inside. The least important things are on the outside. And when I say important, I don't mean like I like baseball better than I like drawing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying the ability to breathe versus the ability to retain the information you're covering in this video. The ability to breathe, that information better be stored on the inside because that's really, really important. Breathing kind of helps you live. So yeah, we're going to say that's important. Outside stuff, less important in terms of life and death. So our limbic system, it mediates basic emotions. It's on the inside. Okay? And it also establishes emotional memory. It's key. So another key piece of this limbic system on the inside of our brain is this guy right here called our, let me get a different color here, amygdala. Amygdala, so cool. Our amygdala is involved in recognizing emotional content. It has a lot of receptors for adrenaline-like molecules. Now, this is the second time we've mentioned adrenaline. So when we have adrenaline, remember that's part of fight or flight responses. All of a sudden the bear comes up, boom, you get scared, okay? Your body releases adrenaline and you're gonna respond. That's definitely ingrained in emotions at the very, very center of our brain. It's also a huge reason why we usually remember negative experiences that happen in our life versus positive experiences that happen in our life. Somebody can tell you 15 different times, you are the awesomest person on the face of the planet. And it makes you feel good for that particular moment in time, but you're probably not going to remember that experience 15 years from now. However, one person insults you, tells you you're the worst blah, blah, blah on the entire planet and says that you're a big blah, blah, blah and insult, 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 the worst insults ever. That person does that one time and if it connects with you and if it releases that adrenaline to store in your amygdala, so your amygdala is activated, you're probably going to remember that emotional experience for the rest of your life. Negative connotations last longer because it activates the amygdala and the limbic system in the middle of your brain. Okay, so next one, our reflex arc. Super duper 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 importante. A reflex arc. It is the simplest nerve circuit. We say this because, well, it doesn't even need to go to the brain. It can just go to the spinal cord. All of these messages going back and forth, they at least have to get to the central nervous system somehow, some way. But remember that we said that the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. So if we have a message through sensory neurons that goes to the central nervous system and it gets to the spinal cord, it already got to the central nervous system. So the central nervous system can make up that decision to send back to the motor pathway. So anyways, I digress. A reflex arc is super, super fast, very rapid. It's automated, which means it happens without us thinking about it. Boom! If you jumped right there, which hopefully you didn't, and if you had headphones on, I apologize. But if you jumped a little bit right there, that is a reflex arc. You didn't even think about it. You didn't think, ooh, that was a loud sound, I must jump. No, it's a reflex arc. It just naturally happened. That information never actually got to your brain. It just went to your spinal cord and went on. Okay, so the reflex arcs are things that don't need to think about or make decisions. These are things like blinking, balance, pupil dilation, right? The light comes in, it just happens that your pupils dilate. They don't necessarily have to think, oh, the light's brighter, the light is brighter, my eyes should constrict, or there's not very much light in here, so my eyes should dilate. You don't think about that. It just happens because it's part of a reflex arc. Or like I just did, startled. Someone startles you, you jump, whatever the case may be. The other example that I used before is you put your hand on a stove and that message of fire hot ow, fire hot ow, fire hot ow, and then move your hand away, move your hand away, move your hand away. You got to move your hand away and it just happens. You know, you don't have to think that it's hot, it's reflex. So same thing here. Reflex arc happens. Okay, something senses everything. Senses go to this spinal cord where our inner neuron makes the decision, and whoopsies, and our motor pathway brings it back to the muscles to cause our foot to kick. Here is another example of the same thing. We have some sort of stimulus where we see it, ow, pain, that hurts, that hurts, that hurts. Message gets to the inner neuron. Neuron makes a message, move your foot away, move your foot away, move your foot away, and your muscle moves your foot away from whatever that bad thing happened. And that is the basics of the nervous system.
It's like this and like that and like this and it's like that and like this and like that and it's like this. So just chill till the next episode.